Hi guys! Today I wanted to talk about suggested reading order for the Middle-earth books because Tolkien wrote a lot. There's been a lot published, even posthumously, about Middle-earth. So I wanted to go through because I have read almost everything in Middle-earth. In fact, on this list, I think there are only 2 books that are Middle-earth related that I haven't read. So I wanted to go ahead and give my suggestions for how you should read these because it can be a little overwhelming looking at them. So first, obviously, I would suggest starting with The Hobbit. Yeah, that's the easiest way to start with Tolkien. Since it's written for kids, the style is just a lot more accessible and it's a lot more whimsical and fun. So yeah, start with The Hobbit and then go on to Lord of the Rings. Again, obviously, almost everyone knows the story of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings as well, so those are the easy ones to dive into. So I definitely would suggest starting there. And that would help you. If you read The Hobbit first, that helps you get a little more used to Tolkien's writing style. And then Lord of the Rings, it starts out very much Hobbit, like The Hobbit, and then it slowly gets less whimsical as it goes along, shall we say. So yeah, I would definitely recommend starting with Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. Obviously, if you started somewhere else, that's totally fine, but for first-time readers, that's where you need to start, is The Hobbit first, and then Lord of the Rings. And then I would say you need to read The Silmarillion next. So the Silmarillion is the stories of Middle-earth during the First Age. So Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit both take place during the Third Age. So this is centuries before anything that's happened in those 2 books, except for the appendices. The appendices may touch on some of this, of Lord of the Rings. In the Silmarillion, you're basically going to get the creation myth that Tolkien wrote. And you're going to get just a lot of elves doing a lot of crazy stuff. That's basically the most of the Silmarillion, is a lot of elves do a lot of crazy, inadvisable things. Yeah. So I would say Silmarillion probably next, and then after the Silmarillion, I would suggest that you read Unfinished Tales. That does not sound exactly like it should be required reading, but it honestly makes a lot of things make sense, and I would say after Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, and Silmarillion, it's probably one of the most accessible on here. The Unfinished Tales goes through, and there's a section for First Age, a section for Second Age, and a section for Third Age, I believe. And it gives background for things that happen. Some of it's just Tolkien's jotted notes. Some of it is a little more in-depth. There is enough related to the Silmarillion that I would suggest you need to read Silmarillion first and then Unfinished Tales. But I would suggest you read Unfinished Tales before you read anything else, because it's just a lot more understandable than most of the rest of this. So, yes, Unfinished Tales. And it, explains, for example, it's got a section where he talks about the wizards. It's got a section where he talks about the Palantiri. How the nation of Rohan was founded. So things like that show up in the Unfinished Tales. So, again, kind of gives you more of an in-depth look. And then and then you can kind of, if that's where you want to stop, that's fine. Unfinished Tales, totally good place to stop. I mean, you can stop obviously after any of them, but if you read that and you decide, I don't know if I like these half-baked scribbles that we've got here, so would not suggest going much further. Unfinished Tales is probably the best way to get some of that while still having some familiarity to everything. Alright, and then we have the 3 Great Tales plus one more. You've got The Children of Hurin, Beren and Luthien, The Fall of Gondolin, and The Fall of Numenor. Children of Hurin is different than the other 3 because it was actually rewritten as a novel. So it is actually a novel length, like a full book, and that's what it is. If you're only going to read one of these 4, I would suggest reading that one just because it's, again, most accessible, easiest to read. Yeah. Beren and Luthien, Fall of Gondolin, and I assume Fall of Numenor. This is the one on this list. One of the ones on this list that I haven't read. I actually don't have the other one on this list because I don't think it's really required because I haven't read it yet. But Beren and Luthien, Fall of Gondolin, and Fall of Numenor, all 3 of these take the different version histories of these 3 stories and retell them. Just sort of, it collects all the different versions of Beren and Luthien and puts it in one book. It collects all the different versions of Fall of Gondolin and puts them in one book. And all the different versions of Fall of Numenor, I assume. That's what I've heard this is. when Fall of Numenor came out, I had just finished reading History of Middle-earth, which we will talk about in a second. And I was sick of version history of Tolkien, because that's pretty much, yeah. Like I said, we'll talk about History of Middle-earth in a second. So if you are particularly drawn to one of those other three, again, Children of Hurin, I would say most people would probably enjoy reading that, just because it is a full-length book. Like, it is an actual novel. But Beren and Luthien, Fall of Gondolin, and Fall of Numenor, if one of those actually interests you more than the others, you can, feel free to pick that up. But if you want to read History of Middle-earth, I would suggest, honestly though, I would suggest before you dive into History of Middle-earth, give one of these, whichever one of these sounds most interesting, a try. And then if you like it, maybe dig a little deeper into History of Middle-earth. That would probably be a wise decision there. Alright. Next we have the History of Middle-earth, as we just mentioned. So what History of Middle-earth is a 12-volume series of Christopher Tolkien publishing large amounts of his father's scribblings about various topics. And it's 12 volumes long, so there's a lot here. The 12 volumes are The Book of Lost Tales, Part 1 and 2, The Lays of Beleriand, The Shaping of Middle-earth, The Lost Road and Other Writings, Return of the Shadow, Treason of Isengard. I have them all written down, which is why I keep glancing down. Treason of Isengard, War of the Ring, Sauron Defeated, Morgoth's Ring, War of the Jewels, and Peoples of Middle-earth. So, personally, having just read these this year, most of these, I may have started this last year, but having just read most of these this year, I'm not going to suggest you read all of them, honestly, unless you are just 100% obsessed like I am. If you are 100% obsessed and you just want to read everything, then by all means, read everything. If you don't want to read everything, though, then I will tell you what is in each of the volumes, and you can decide from there which ones sound the most interesting to you, but I will make a recommendation for what I think is the most interesting parts of these books. So, the Books of Lost Tales are Tolkien's first versions of the stories of the Silmarillion, because this is long before The Hobbit was ever thought of. This is long before any of that stuff became part of the Legendarium. So, Books of Lost Tales were in part at least written, I think, like in the 1920s, maybe even 1910s when he was in World War I. So, these are really old, really different from the Silmarillion versions, which is why I suggest reading that to also see if you like the version history stuff. But honestly, even if you didn't like the version history, these are different enough that I think they're pretty fascinating. So I would suggest you read the Books of Lost Tales. Next is Lays of Beleriand, which is just some of the major stories retold as poetry. I would actually also suggest you read this one, because I did really enjoy it. At least read The Tale of Beren and Luthien. Or The Lay of Beren and Luthien. I think it's The Lay of Beren and Luthien is what the poem is called. It's really good. But all of the poetry, actually. And I'm not even a big fan of poetry. So if you're like, I don't normally enjoy reading things that are written in poetry, still, I would suggest at least giving it a try. Next is Shaping of Middle-earth. This one is more about the languages and like the physical description of Middle-earth. Personally, I don't find that very interesting. I would suggest skipping this one, but that's just me. Next is Lost Road and Other Writings. So this is the first version of the narrative called the Silmarillion is in this book, if I remember correctly. Or maybe it's just, there's so many different versions that they kind of all blend together. But there is part of it that I would say would be worth reading, and that is the actual section called The Lost Road. The Lost Road is Tolkien's first attempt of writing a time travel story. We have another one later. This, in case you have not heard of this, this is Tolkien and C.S. Lewis were talking one day, and they were talking about how there were no more stories that they liked, like of the kind that they liked. And so they made a deal that Tolkien would write, one of them would write a time travel story, and one of them would write a space travel story. I think they flipped a coin or something for it, and Lewis got space and Tolkien got time. Lewis wrote the space trilogy, which I've read and I really enjoy. There is a lot of Britishisms in the language, as in like words that I would call swear words. I don't know if Lewis would have considered them swear words, but I would. So be forewarned about that, but I did really enjoy Space Trilogy. Definitely weird. Like, definitely weird. Don't go into it expecting Narnia, but still. So Lewis wrote the space trilogy, and Tolkien tried twice to write a time travel story, and neither one of them ever got fully fleshed out. But both of the time travel stories that we actually have are interestingly both connected to Numenor. And The Lost Road is where Numenor actually first shows up. So I would recommend at least reading the Lost Road section of that book. And then the next 3.5 are all about version history of Lord of the Rings. So this is where Hobbit has been published, and Tolkien is trying to write a sequel to it. The books are Return of the Shadow, Treason of Isengard. The books are Return of the Shadow, Treason of Isengard, War of the Ring, and Sauron Defeated. Now, Sauron Defeated is only half version history of Lord of the Rings, but the others are entirely version history. I would say Return of the Shadow was really interesting to read, just because everything is so different at first. It took him so long to settle on Frodo's name. So long. And, like, it starts out with Bilbo being the one who's going on the adventure, even though he is definitely a Levendy-1. So I would say Return of the Shadow is actually kind of worth reading. Treason of Isengard and War of the Ring, they're interesting, and if you're liking the version history that you've seen so far, give them a read. Or if you just really want to see the development of Lord of the Rings, but, yeah, I don't know that I would necessarily suggest you read those two. Again, Sauron Defeated, the first half is also the ending of Lord of the Rings, because it didn't all fit in 3 volumes. But the second half includes the Notion Club papers and the Drowning of Anadune. That's as good as we're going to get with that pronunciation. So the Notion Club papers is Tolkien's second attempt at a time travel story. And that's a fascinating thing. I have no idea what's going on there, but it is fascinating, and I highly suggest reading that one. Drowning of Anadune, if I remember correctly, is also just another version of the Sinking of Numenor, which I believe we get in Lost Road, but it's been a little bit since I've read these. I've read a lot since then, and I've read a lot of version history of Middle-earth, so I don't remember exactly which is which. But I would at least recommend reading the Notion Club papers, because those were incredible. Lost Road was also really interesting, so recommend reading at least both of those. The next volume is Morgoth's Ring, and this has another version history of the Silmarillion, but it also has a few other more interesting elements. So the elements of this that I would suggest that you read are the laws and customs of the Eldar, which goes through, like, just basically everything about Elvish customs, just like it sounds. It's very interesting. A lot about marriage, because this comes about the time of this is inserted into the book at the point where the Silmarillion is talking about Finwë and Miriel. And if you don't know who that is, that's a Silmarillion reference. So if you remember who Finwë and Miriel are from the Silmarillion, great. If not, read the Silmarillion first, and then do not try to read History of Middle-earth without reading the Silmarillion. Please, I am begging you. You will have no idea what's going on. I wouldn't have. I know I would not have. The next one that I would recommend reading is the Authorbaith. It's actually called the Authorbaith Finrod a Andraith. And this is, I think it's only like, I want to say it's maybe 20 pages. I'm not sure. No, it's more than that. If you take into account Christopher Tolkien's notes, it's more than 20 pages, I think. But the Authorbaith is basically where Tolkien puts his own theology into Middle-earth, and, like, there's even basically I wouldn't say necessarily a full prophecy, but they come to the conclusion that for Middle-earth to be righted again, Eru, who is God in Middle-earth, will have to come down into it himself. And I think it's even suggested that he would become human. So it's very fascinating. I would highly recommend reading Authorbaith. It's so good. And then the last section of it is Myths Transformed. I would maybe recommend this. If you kind of like the idea of Middle-earth being a more realistic fantasy universe, then by all means read this. If you like the original Silmarillion version of how everything went down, I would only read parts of it, like just skip around. If you like the idea that the world was flat until Numenor, maybe don't read this one. Yeah, I don't count everything in History of Middle Earth as canon. Myth Transformed in a lot of ways to me is just not canon because I didn't like it. That's not what I want Middle Earth to be, you know? So, anyway, that is Morgoth's Ring. It's definitely worth reading at least. Lace, Laws and Customs of the Eldar. People online call it Lace a lot. And Otherbaith. Next is War of the Jewels. Guess what it has? Even more version history of the Silmarillion. Oh my goodness, I read so much of that in the past 2 years because it took me a while to get through this book. But it was probably within one, like, 12-month span, but not like 2 different years, if that makes sense. So, only part of this that I think I would recommend reading is Wanderings of Hurin and Other Writings. This is some stuff that didn't make it into the Children of Hurin novel, apparently, and so it's just got a few little assorted notes. And the last volume is Peoples of Middle Earth, which is a lot more interesting than most of the others. I think it also... No, so the first section of Peoples of Middle Earth is the history of the... and, like, version history of the appendices of Lord of the Rings. Because we needed that, didn't we? At that point, I was just done with all of the version history, and I was just ready to be done with this series. I was on book 12, and I was very happy. But then there's 4 other sections of the book. So part 2 is Late Writings. I would suggest reading that one. There was some interesting stuff in there, just like, again, Silmarillion era stuff. If you read the Silmarillion and you did not enjoy, like, the stories, even if, like, the Silmarillion stories are not very fleshed out, but if you did not enjoy, like, the basic plot, then don't read any of this, because none of the, except for maybe the 3 or 4 Lord of the Rings history books. But I enjoy Silmarillion. Honestly, I may like the first age more than the third age. So, yeah. In part 3, I would suggest reading Of Lembas. There is another section that is about, like, the version history of the language and how, like, not version history, how, like, the Elvish languages changed. I care very little about the languages stuff, so that part was difficult for me to get through. So, I would suggest reading the Of Lembas, though. And then part 4 is Unfinished Tales. Not the same tales from the book Unfinished Tales. That's different. These are 2 stories that Tolkien wrote that are Middle-earth related that he did not do much with. So the first one is The New Shadow, which is these 2, I strongly recommend reading these, even if honestly you don't care to read any of the rest of this. If you've got a friend who's got these or your library has it, at the very least read these 2 stories because they are really good. So New Shadow is a sequel to Lord of the Rings. Tolkien stopped because it was going to get too political for him. Like, he didn't want to write about this much of a political book, and it was just going to be kind of different than the stories he wanted to write. Which is a shame, in my opinion, because it was so good. The basic premise is that this is in the days of Aragorn's son as king, and people have kind of started to forget everything that happened with Sauron. And so there is a new shadow coming up. I'll just word it that way. And then Tal Elmar is the second one. And this takes place during the Second Age, and it is Númenorian. Númenorian related, at least. It's about it's about a boy who doesn't fit in with his people because he has some weird notions, like the elderly should be honored and not scoffed at. Things like that, where he is very much good in a way that the rest of his village just isn't. He's his father's favorite son, and then, I wonder why, with that sort of an idea that nobody else has. But, anyway, then he doesn't look like anybody else, and that's because his grandmother, I think, was from a different people group. Anyway, this was such a good story. I would also suggest reading this. This was the one that I was really sad that he did not continue. And then we have The Nature of Middle-earth, which is not part of the history of Middle-earth. We are done with that now. The Nature of Middle-earth is, again, more just, not really version history this time. These are more, like, just little notes. Like, these aren't stories either. Just, like, little notes on Middle-earth itself. There was one story that maybe, or there was one note set that maybe was a little on the edge of what I would like to read, sir. I did not actually read that one. But other than that, so there was one in there that I would not suggest you read, but I don't remember which one it is off the top of my head. But the rest of them were really good. Interesting. I mean, it's not a story, so it's hard to say it's good, you know? But it was interesting enough. And that was when I was able to say I have read almost everything Tolkien related. So, yeah. The other two that are sort of Middle-earth related, sort of not, are The Adventures of Tom Bombadil and Bilbo's Last Song. And these are two poetry books. Actually, Bilbo's Last Song may just be a poem, supposedly written by Bilbo in World. I have not read Bilbo's Last Song, so I don't have anything to say about that. I think it is... I've seen it's like only 70 pages or something, and it's the cost of a full-price book on Amazon or wherever it is that you can buy it. So I have not bought it yet because I'm not doing that. Not paying that much money. But, so there's that one, and then there's Adventures of Tom Bombadil, which I have read, which was fine. I mean, they didn't all talk about Tom Bombadil, actually. I think only one or two did, which was weird. So, in summary, what would I suggest you read of these? Well, I would suggest reading The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, obviously, and then The Silmarillion and Unfinished Tales. I would suggest you read The Children of Hurin, and at least one of the following: Beren and Luthien, Fall of Gondolin, and Fall of Numenor. Again, this is assuming Fall of Numenor is just same sort of stuff that was in History of Middle-earth. I'm assuming it is. Having not read it, I can't vouch for that, but that's what I have heard that it is. Just to give you an idea from those three, if you like version history. And if you do, then in History of Middle-earth, I would suggest that you read the Books of Lost Tales, Lays of Beleriand, the Lost Road section of Lost Road and other writings, Return of the Shadow, just because some of the early Lord of the Rings stuff is really fun. In Sauron Defeated, I would suggest you read the Notion Club papers. In Morgoth's Ring, I would suggest that you read Laws and Customs of the Eldar, the Otherbaith, and possibly Myths Transformed, depending on if you are okay with having your world shattered. In Wars of the Jewels, I would recommend that you read Wanderings of Hurin and Other Writings, Part 3. In Peoples of Middle-earth, I would recommend that you read Part 2, Late Writings of Lembas from Part 3, and then Part 4, Unfinished Tales. And then Nature of Middle-earth is sort of a toss-up. If you want to read the more just like jotted down notes, you can, obviously. No one's stopping you. But definitely, I would not say that's necessarily required reading. So, have you read any of these? Or do you want to read any of these? How deep do you want to go down the Tolkien rabbit hole? Do you want to go as deep as I have? I'm not sure if I would recommend it. Yeah, I would. I would recommend it. Maybe not as quickly as I did, though. Maybe take your time on some of those History of Middle-earth volumes. So anyway, that is a guide to the world of Middle-earth beyond The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. And the Silmarillion, because most people know about the Silmarillion. But anyway, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. And I'll see you all next time. Bye!